welcome back, everyone. I hope you've had a wonderful lunch, and thank you all once again for joining the 8th Annual Central and Eastern European Energy Security Conference. We still have several fantastic sessions for you this afternoon, but I'm very excited for this upcoming conversation on Ukraine, rebuilding, transforming, and turning Ukraine into a clean energy security giant that it can be. Our keynote speaker for this panel, just really honored to welcome Ambassador Geoff Pyatt, who is the Assistant Secretary for Energy Resources at the Department of State. Very few people out there know the region in Ukraine in the U.S. government as Ambassador Pyatt, so we really, truly are happy to welcome you today and look forward to your keynote remarks.
Thank you very much, Olga, for the introduction, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for having me back here today. Ministers, colleagues, friends, I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation, and in particular, this panel, which is just so well timed, just a couple of days before the Ukraine Recovery Conference that will take place next week on Tuesday and Wednesday in in London. Our delegation will be headed by Secretary Blinken, which reflects the abiding commitment of the Biden administration to stand by Ukraine, and our understanding that even as the Ukrainian armed forces continue working on the battlefield to reclaim their sovereign territory, we need to be working together with the international community to lay the foundation for reconstruction and the emergence of a prosperous democratic European Ukraine in the future. So this is a terrific panel on an absolutely vital set of issues. Since coming back to Washington as Assistant Secretary, the Ukraine part of my life has focused on two complementary goals. One, of course, is our immediate imperative to help support the resilience of Ukraine's energy infrastructure and help Ukraine to defeat Vladimir Putin's efforts to weaponize the winter against the Ukrainian people, and I'll return to that in just a minute, but also working just as hard as we can jointly with our allies and partners around the world to lay the foundation for a future Ukrainian energy system, which will be cleaner, greener, more sustainable, more resilient, and reflecting the highest European standards that I know the Ukrainian people are so interested in achieving. I came to this job after 9 years working as a U.S. ambassador in Europe. I lived through the war from my vantage point in Athens, but critically, of course, I served 3 years in Kyiv during the first period of Russia's unprovoked invasion of a sovereign European country. I know firsthand the strength and the resilience of the Ukrainian people, and I know that all of us, and I speak for everybody in this room, expressing extraordinary admiration for how the Ukrainian people have demonstrated again and again over the past 15 months now their determination to prevail in this epic struggle. In terms of the energy story, and in particular, the Ukrainian response to the systematic Russian attacks on the energy grid, which began last October. I think we all stand in admiration of the Ukrainian energy workers who have been out on the field working to maintain the integrity of the Ukrainian energy grid. There is no question that starting with the attacks last October, Vladimir Putin believed that he could use attacks on civilian infrastructure to accomplish what he had failed to achieve on the battlefield, to force the Ukrainian people to relent. That failed in part due to the courage and resilience of the Ukrainians themselves, but also a lot of hard work by the U.S. government, by our interagency community here, including the State Department, the Agency for International Development, Department of Energy, all of whom were really all hands on deck to mobilize assistance from the U.S. side, but critically also our partnership with the European Union, with the European energy community. We have ensured that just as Putin failed in his effort to weaponize his oil and gas resources against Europe starting early in 2022, he failed in the winter of 22-23 to weaponize the winter against the Ukrainian people. But Russia continues its brutal attacks. Today, the Ukrainian energy grid is about 50% degraded. There are billions of dollars of investment that will be required to undo the damage that Putin has done with his attacks on thermal power plants, on auto transformers and the transmission grid. And we saw just in the past few days with the attack on the Khakova Dam, a further example of attacks on civilian energy infrastructure, which has further destabilized the system. In the case of the dam, the loss of that asset and the billions of dollars of future damage that have been done by that attack has also rippled across the energy system, as Ukrenergo has been forced to cut back on hydro generation further upstream in order to warehouse water that will be necessary to hopefully refill the reservoir at some future date. So we have been working systematically through a G7 plus coordination group that I have been leading at the request of the White House in order to both dialogue with our Ukrainian counterparts, Deputy Prime Minister Kubrakov, the CEO of Ukrenergo, Kudrytsky, Minister Halashenko and the team at the Ministry of Energy, in order to understand in pretty close to real time their immediate requirements for support, and then to identify where that support can come from. Secretary Blinken himself has led a number of G7 plus foreign ministers meetings, jointly first with Germany as G7 president and now with Japan as G7 president, to elevate that focus up to the political level in what Foreign Minister Baerbock called the energy Ramstein, an effort to parallel what we have done on our military and security assistance coordination in the area of grid and energy equipment. As Secretary Blinken likes to say, we've all become a lot more expert on the supply chain for 900 kVA auto transformers, and also the difficulty of quickly repairing the damage that Vladimir Putin has done. Together, we've delivered more than 84,000 tons of energy equipment, more than 5 million pieces of gear, which has flooded into Ukraine in order to give Ukrainian energy workers, and I know we have Maxim here from DTEK, who will be able to speak more eloquently about the work that is actually being done at the ground level. But we can't relent. There are only about 15 weeks left before the next heating season. So we will not take our foot off the gas in terms of working to deliver Ukraine's urgent infrastructure needs. The Agency for International Development has tenders out for auto transformers. The first 2 new auto transformers delivered to Ukraine are now in the final stages of delivery, financed by Japan, manufactured in Korea, and delivered by UNDP. The European energy community itself has a very elaborate procurement system in place now in order to deliver what the Ukrainians need to undo the damage that Vladimir Putin has done. I will say, however, that what has really inspired me, including when I was back in Kyiv in December, is the degree to which even amid this military and security challenge and amid the energy emergency of last winter, Ukraine continues to work towards the vision of a cleaner and greener energy system, a system that meets the highest European standards, rather than rebuilding the Soviet-style centralized grid that was the legacy of Ukraine's independence. We are absolutely committed to our dialogue and listening to the Ukrainians in this effort. That will very much be part of the work when we're together in London next week, and we're delighted that we will have such senior representation from the Ukrainians themselves in London. But this is not just about hardware. It's also about software. And I know from my own time in Kyiv how central energy has been both to the Ukrainian economy, but also to the challenges to Ukrainian democracy. Energy has been one of the traditional vectors of Russian malign influence in Ukraine. That's why it's so important that on my watch as ambassador, Ukraine ceased to depend on Gazprom as a supplier, and we developed the infrastructure for reverse flow from Europe and other non-Russian sources of energy. Energy has also been a traditional driver of corruption. It is not a coincidence that so many of the oligarchs, including several who are either in jail or have fled to Russia since this all began, made their money first in obolenergos and local energy networks. And again, our Ukrainian colleagues today can speak to that. The United States is committed and has made a very large financial commitment to helping the Ukrainians to build a European energy grid for the future and to continue to push the envelope on the greening of that grid. So more green hydrogen, more biogas, restoring Ukraine's status as a clean energy supplier to the rest of Europe. Deputy Prime Minister Kubrakov and Energy Minister Halushenko like to talk about Ukraine as a power brick for the rest of Europe, which it truly should be as we look to the future. Ukraine, once it restores its sovereign territory, will have a very large nuclear resource, has some of Europe's best terrain in terms of wind, in terms of solar, and ample possibility to develop new lines of energy generation, for instance, in the area of clean hydrogen. It is critical, however, that we bring the private sector along in this effort. That's going to be another big part of the conversation in London, and why I think it's so important that the Ukrainians themselves will be there to talk about reform, to talk about the business environment. And I know that's also a priority for our hosts in the FCDO. And of course, that new investment, that future investment environment, if it's going to attract American and other companies, is going to have to be built on principles of transparency, rule of law, competitive markets, all the reform principles that our colleagues who are here today from Central and Eastern Europe understand so well, because you have traversed exactly the same transition. So let me just finish up, first of all, as I always do, by quoting my president, President Biden, who has been so eloquent in making clear that we will stand by Ukraine as long as it takes, but also in highlighting the State Department's extraordinary focus on this particular facet of our broader support for Ukraine, and my optimism that we're actually coming into a very important and positive period in terms of the Ukraine energy story and the benefits that the rest of Europe will derive from a Ukraine that is restored to its sovereign borders and has the ability to reestablish its role as one of the energy powerhouses of the continent, and also something I'm sure Roger will talk about, Ukraine's prospect as well to become part of this energy transition supply chain, which we need so urgently to develop because we don't have enough wind nacelles, we don't have enough non-Chinese silicon wafers and solar cell manufacturing facilities. We're going to need all of the resources that we can identify, including in the area of critical minerals, as part of our own energy transition in Europe and here in the United States. And Ukraine is extremely well positioned to be part of that story as well. So thank you again, Olga, and thank you to colleagues, and I very much look forward to hearing, especially from our friends and colleagues in Kyiv today. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. What a perfect setup and introductory remarks for the rest of the conversation for the next hour. Getting the immediate support right for Ukraine and getting the reconstruction of the energy sector right. It's not just an ethically right thing to do or a nice to have. It is essential to Europe's future decarbonization and energy security efforts. I am pleased to welcome our panel today. We have representation from the European Commission, from the private sector, and from the U.S. government. So I think covering a lot of the key angles here as we have this timely discussion. I will go and introduce our first speaker, Andriy Kobolyev first, who is the CEO and the founder of Eney and also a former CEO of Naftogaz. Andriy, going to you first with a quick question. How does the immediate support for the energy sector in Ukraine, how does that bolster future reconstruction efforts? How does that provide foundation for that? And how can the international community prevent future massive attacks on Ukraine's critical energy infrastructure? We've seen terrible ecocide and genocide as a result of the explosions of the dam committed by Russians. So how do we prevent that? How do we work together on making sure that that never happens again?
Thank you so much for introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. I would echo something I've been saying during our previous conference approximately a year ago, is that Ukraine did amazingly good job in the past by joining European energy system. And in 2014 and later on in the gas sector, we won, and we did win, against Russian blackmail and Russian leverage, because we consciously chose to become a part of European united and single gas market. Later on, we connected to European electricity system, which helped us a lot during last winter and will help us in the future. And I'm strongly convinced that for the resilient and stable operation of Ukrainian both gas and electricity systems next winter and in many winters to come, being part of the united European energy system is a critical and crucial element of our success and of our resilience. That also opens significant opportunity for private business to come, to invest, and to develop components of our system right now, while war is ongoing. And that, in my view, one of the main challenges for both Ukrainian government, Ukrainian business, but also our Western partners, European Union, United States, United Kingdom, everybody. We will not be able to maintain our economy properly, and we will not be able to deliver economic outcome if there is no development while the war keeps and while the war exists, while the war is ongoing. That challenge is something which, in my view, can be addressed properly, provided there is firstly enough of technological support, meaning technologies are made available to be implemented and built in Ukraine. There is enough insurance for private business not to be afraid of the military consequences. There is enough funding provided for companies willing to come to Ukraine and develop various elements of our energy system, which later on can be used to send energy to Europe. It is also important that while we are doing this, we are removing impediments which were implemented last year because of price situation, but no limitation on import and export of energy in any form, whether it's electricity or gas, should exist between Ukraine and Europe. So being part of one single European market and also having access to the three components, which I just described, would not only allow us to win the war and keep maintaining our economy while we keep fighting Russian military forces, but also create a solid foundation for development of our economy in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your remarks. We will go to Jake Levine next, who is the Chief Climate Officer at the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. DFC provides a variety of unique financial services. Could you talk about where can DFC play the most meaningful role? And following up on Andriy's comments from earlier, what can be done, what kind of offerings, financial support, risk management, risk transfer can be offered right now without waiting for Ukraine's victory? What can DFC do now for businesses and other entities that are out there hungry to support Ukraine's reconstruction efforts today?
Well, thank you, Olga, for that really important question. And also thank you to you and also to the Council for convening this crucial gathering. It's an honor to join you, I think, for the second year in a row now. But the work that the Atlantic Council does to provide a venue for this type of discussion, not only about policy and diplomacy, but about business and how to bring investment into Ukraine, into Eastern and Central Europe is critical. And we appreciate your efforts to do that. And I also just want to thank Ambassador Pyatt, my co-conspirator and colleague on so much of this, the leadership that you have provided and the clarity and the vision for the administration's approach to supporting Ukraine and supporting Ukraine in its work to become fully resilient, fully independent and a leader in Europe on clean energy and energy security is really, really remarkable, and we appreciate it. Let me just give you a sense, because you mentioned what can we be doing right now. DFC has been in Ukraine. We are there today, and we will be there tomorrow during reconstruction. We have right now a portfolio of nearly $800 million of investments and exposure in the country. We have been very active during the war to communicate as loudly as possible that we are open for business. In fact, I had the opportunity to be in Kyiv in February with my CEO, Scott Nathan, when we announced several new transactions that had taken place in the wartime era, including one which was about our intention to mobilize $250 million for Ukrainian commercial banks to support small and medium enterprises across the economy, the lifeblood of the Ukrainian economy that will create jobs, that will continue to bolster the tax base, that will help Ukraine's economy withstand this brutal attack. And we believe that that mobilization of DFC resources will easily catalyze more than $1 billion of private sector investment in the small and medium enterprise sector. We're actively building a pipeline for transactions that we can continue doing right now. One of the tools that is most sort of widely deployed in our portfolio in Ukraine today, and which we think is relevant, particularly in the moment that we're in, is our political risk insurance product, which is a very unique financial tool that gives the private sector comfort in doing deals in very difficult jurisdictions. We are not aware of any commercial operation that would seek to start new operations or new business in Ukraine without this type of a de-risking tool, and so we're eager to provide it where it can help advance Ukraine's efforts on energy and climate security and on financial security, and where it also dovetails with the US interest. And I just want to mention that in addition to DFC's deployment of political risk insurance, alongside, by the way, a whole host of other tools that are relevant, from financing and guarantees to equity investments and technical assistance in Ukraine, we're also very actively, and I want to flag this for many of the excellencies and colleagues in the audience today who have a regional focus, that we are working very hard to also support the countries neighboring Ukraine, the Eastern and Central European countries that have to provide the bulwark and the wall against future malign influence from Russia and others. And just in this year, we have made significant commitments to help diversify energy supplies in Moldova. In Poland, just last week, our board announced another $500 million in investment in this area, where we are helping to enable shipments of US supplies of energy in lieu of Russian supplies. We're active in Kosovo. We met with the Prime Minister of Kosovo, who, upon our departure, when we asked, what advice would you have for us as we address this really now global crisis, his response was, people are worried about the Baltics, and I want them to worry about the Balkans. We have malign influence happening every single day, coming from Russia, coming from other neighboring countries. And so we've been very focused on how we can support Kosovo and North Macedonia and Croatia in that work. And the product that we deployed in Kosovo, which is uniquely sort of American in the sense that it follows on a USAID grant and it follows on an MCC compact, was a guarantee for DFC to support something called the Kosovo Credit Guarantee Fund, which is now receiving applications for electric vehicle businesses, for energy efficiency businesses, for rooftop solar businesses, to help Kosovo to develop its own climate and energy security and resilience. I want to just mention one last thing, and then I'll conclude, which is a sort of something to underscore a point that Ambassador Pyatt made in his remarks. which is that we are eager to support the Ukrainian vision for a new kind of energy infrastructure. The very first meeting that I had in Kyiv was at Ukrenergo about 8:30 in the morning, and 10 minutes into the meeting, the air raid sirens went off. We moved down to the basement. We conducted the rest of the meeting in a bunker, and we had a presentation from the CEO of Ukrenergo outlining the vision of a distributed clean energy grid that would no longer be subject to explicit targeting by Russian missile and drone strikes. They've withstood thousands, but part of the reason that they are unfortunately an easy target is, to Jeff's point, that it is Soviet infrastructure that the Russians literally have maps to, and they understand where all the critical nodes and substations and transformers sit. And so this infrastructure is essential. It's integrated fundamentally into Ukraine's national security, and the vision that Ukrenergo, in partnership with Minister Halashenko, has laid out for a clean energy grid that can export zero carbon electricity. I see our Assistant Secretary from DOE here in charge of our nuclear program, Katie Huff. The work that the Ukrainians are doing to lay the groundwork for small modular reactors, for major conventional reactors, to be a net exporter of this clean energy is fundamental, not just to the Ukrainian security, but to European security. And this is what we're actively working to do. I'm eager to learn from those of you in the audience in the private sector about your projects, where we can support. I'm sure there's stuff we can do with GE and Roger, and appreciate the chance to join you.
Thank you so much. Your point on making sure that we're not rebuilding back the old, inefficient Soviet-style system, but something that's cleaner, more resilient, more integrated, an innovation playbox in a way where you can truly try out new technologies and how they interact with the consumers and with the energy producers. So thank you so much, Jake, for your fantastic remarks. I think through all of these remarks, it's clear that the private sector will have a major role to play. It's my pleasure to introduce Roger Martella, who is the Chief Executive Officer of GE. Roger, what are the top 3 things that the private sector is looking at when considering engagement in the reconstruction and, let's say, transformation efforts? We're not just reconstructing, we're transforming Ukraine into the next clean energy powerhouse. And for companies interested in these opportunities, once again, what can they be doing now? Is there a way for them to kind of start thinking through these efforts now, where they're not waiting for Ukraine's full victory, where they can start exploring those business development opportunities now? And what are some of the barriers standing in the way, and how do we address them?
Well, Olga, thank you for the honor of including the private sector on behalf of GE and the private sector for being part of this discussion and for the partnership with our colleagues here in the US government and Ukraine and elsewhere. And for GE, as a company that helps provide 1/3 of the world's energy, we see energy as the lifeblood of our civilization. Kids need energy to feel safe, parents to access healthcare, to live a prosperous life. And so when someone targets energy, we take that pretty seriously. And I can't think of anything that's a higher priority for our employees, for our leadership, for our company, than to support the emergency power of Ukraine, to support the reconstruction of the grid in this clean energy model. And also, as Secretary Pyatt talked about, which I'd like to cover too, is building a new supply chain so that we're not just delivering equipment to Ukraine, but we're helping them build the factories and the workforce and the training so they can become exporters of clean energy equipment. So that's all part of what we want to do. And I think to your point about what are the 3 things to enable that today, I think the first really is what we're doing today. It's partnership, public-private partnership. Companies thrive in environments that are de-risked. They're all about how to de-risk their environments. And when you're working in a war-torn situation, trying to do emergency things with a lot of uncertainty, it's kind of the antithesis of how companies are able to really successfully operate. So with the partnership with the State Department and our other colleagues in government, it's been a true public-private partnership that's enabled the government to de-risk the environment for companies so that we can focus on what we're doing and getting the technology where it needs to be. An example of that, earlier this year, we were able to deliver an emergency generator, TM2500, which can power 100,000 homes on a trailer. And we were able only to do that because of our partnership with the US government, de-risking that environment so we could really focus on the delivery. Same thing with the Kamenova Dam, working through a partnership on how we can get the consequences of that addressed as quickly as possible so we can restore power and so on. So this theme of public-private partnership, it's really been unprecedented. I think it's the best partnership I've seen in my career. It gives me a lot of optimism for where we're going to go, both for Ukraine and the energy transition. I think the second is, to your point about what can we do today, is the theme of lead time and planning now for things that are going to take a year or two to work out. The energy transition is happening. As a company that produces much of the equipment for the world, we do not have this sitting on shelves. There's no inventory around, and the lead time on this type of equipment that's needed in Ukraine is many years if you get in the queue. Now, we have to rethink that, and of course, we're going to prioritize equipment. We're going to work with our customers to prioritize, but the sooner we know what's needed, the earlier we can engage on the planning, the quicker we can allocate resources, the quicker we can make sure that we have things where they need to be and we can reprioritize. And part of what we want to do along the same time is we want to make sure we're using our global inventories years ahead of time so we can allocate things for Ukraine. We're talking to our customers to say, sorry, you're going to be about 6 months late because we have a higher purpose here. But we want to also be talking, it's not too soon to be talking about supply chain, about talking about building factories. What's the type of equipment where Ukraine can hit the ground running, building some of the equipment they need, some of the equipment Eastern and Central Europe needs for the clean energy technology? How can we start to train those workforces? So we're already starting those conversations. It's not too soon, and we need to be doing that right now. I think the third thing I'd say, what we need is kind of runs a little counter to the other two, is flexibility. It's not going to be a straight line. It hasn't been a straight line so far. When you normally work with a customer, you have a contract, you have a timeline, you implement that contract and so on. And we have to understand that there's going to be some challenges along the way. Internally, we have to know that. We have kind of a different mode when I speak about Ukraine, where my leadership's become a lot more flexible with me. There's some uncertainty here. We need to pause on this. We need to hold on to that. If it was another customer, they wouldn't have that patience. But for Ukraine, we're being more flexible. And the same has to happen with our external stakeholders, our customers, our supply chain. We're going to have to just think outside the box and be more flexible, knowing these are pretty unprecedented circumstances. So I'd say those are the three things that we can do to be successful here. I'd like to just close by saying this is critical for Ukraine. Nothing's more important. But if we look at Central and Eastern Europe being a leader in this clean energy transition, and I think really leading the world and maybe the most pragmatic, the most commonsensical approach to a successful clean energy transition, I hope that some of these lessons we can apply more broadly than Ukraine and support Central and Eastern Europe on the supply chain, on having that equipment ready to go, and being able to integrate all of this together.
Thank you so much, Roger. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned several tools that are already existing, successful, they're working well, but where are the gaps? What's missing for companies as they assess their involvement?
I think that we have to inspire companies to be thinking years down the road. We tend to think in the short term, we tend to think quarter to quarter, and this does not lend itself to that. I think, again, our partnership with the US government has really helped de-risk that environment, but we know this equipment's going to be needed, whether it's a year from now, 18 months, 2 years from now, and we have to be thinking with that mindset of not where we are today, but where we need to be, and then working backwards kind of month by month, quarter to quarter, to make sure we're working with our suppliers, with our supply chains, with our customers, with our infrastructure, so that everything lines up. If we don't do this now, I know we're having a conference in London next week where this is really critical, we're gonna miss the opportunity, because it's not going to be the demand or the resources. There's lots of resources here. It's going to just be the logistics and being able to deliver, especially in the context. I just want to be clear on this. The Inflation Reduction Act is working. It is driving a lot of demand in the US. We're seeing other countries all around the world doing similar things that's driving demand. The energy transition is happening, and we need to make sure we're prioritizing Ukraine as the demand goes up here and the capacity just can't keep up.
Thank you so much. We'll go back to our virtual panelists. Paula Pinho, who is the Director for Just Transition, Consumers, Energy Efficiency and Innovation, the Director-General for Energy at the European Commission. Paula, thank you so much for joining, and it was lovely to see you in Dubrovnik at the IMF and the Croatian Bank conference. So thank you so much for being here. I have a quick question for you on the role of energy efficiency in the reconstruction transformation of Ukraine's energy sector. And then, of course, what does a just transformation, what does a just reconstruction look like, and ways that the Commission can support and engage in these efforts?
Thank you, Olga, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for organizing, for inviting me. Very pleased to be here with these fellow panelists. And before speaking and looking into the future, I think it is worth spending a moment also in what has been done over the past years. And Andriy already alluded to this. And in fact, since Ukraine joined the energy community in 2011, it's been really making sustained effort in basically integrating the single, being part of the EU single market. And this has been a work over years where Ukraine, well before the war and for a sustained period of time, has transposed legislation aligned with the legislation in the EU across the energy sector. So be it on renewables, be it on energy efficiency, be it on the market, on the electricity market. So really incorporating and implementing principles which are in line also with the legislation that we have in the EU, and clearly coming closer and closer to what is the internal market of the European Union, and certainly also on energy. And this is actually what has allowed also to make a difference over the past year, notably when we think of the synchronization with the electricity grid of the European Union, which happened practically overnight and was not planned as such. And so this is because a lot of work had been done in advance in bringing Ukraine closer together. In parallel, we had set up already a few years ago a high-level working group on market integration based on a jointly agreed reform roadmap, jointly agreed with Ukraine, of course. And you would think when the war started, forget about it, right? I mean, Ukraine now has other priorities, other things to be putting their efforts in. Well, believe it or not, the discussions in this group about market reform continue and have been going on. And I have really been impressed from the very first day of the war, how incredibly our friends from Ukraine have been focusing always on the future and on the day that this war will end, and how will the new Ukraine look like. It is really inspiring, and I can't not say this because it's been impressive in terms of commitment, of resilience, of determination. Now, on energy efficiency especially, Ukraine has adopted in 2021 an energy efficiency law, again, very much aligned with the legislation on energy efficiency in the European Union. And interestingly, Ukraine has actually met its national target on energy efficiency for 2020 and is adopting a number of policies and measures and has also its own national energy and energy efficiency action plan. Also good news, Ukraine will now be working on the National Energy and Climate Plan, which is also a tool that we use within the European Union, and which is really a roadmap across the whole of the energy system with a concrete trajectory, ambition for 2030 across the energy system, where there is the role of energy efficiency, of renewables, of decarbonization in general. So we are very confident, really, in the European Commission that once this terrible war is over, that Ukraine will be able to leapfrog in terms of energy transition, as actually is happening within the EU. Ironically, this tragic war is accelerating the energy transition within the EU. And with all the determination that I'm seeing, I'm very confident that the same will happen, is starting to happen, because as we see, we're discussing the reconstruction, we are discussing the future, and so many actors across the world, not just in Ukraine, are committed to a build back better reconstruction and are already investing it, be it the public, but the private sector, and we'll be seeing this also in the London conference next week. And it's clear that the reconstruction will be based on a different system, on a decentralized energy system, on a smarter, on a more efficient decentralized, on a more efficient energy system. And the foundations were already there in terms of regulatory framework. Their support will be there, and the determination clearly is there. You mentioned also the just transition. How can we help? Already before the war, we had a program on just transition for coal regions in Ukraine, which of course now has been suspended. But there are a number of programs which we will are resuming in an adjusted manner to targeting the context of Ukraine in order to allow it to start already now looking into the future and in looking into really an energy system which can also avoid the mistakes and the hurdles that we have gone through within the EU. That is also the advantage. So again, the opportunity for Ukraine to leapfrog into a decarbonized energy system.
Thank you so much, Paula. And before I introduce our next speaker, I want to remind our in-person audience that we will take some questions towards the end. There's a mic that you are welcome to line afterwards, or you can submit your questions online, which I will be tracking as well. So just to remind us to start thinking through some of the questions for our fantastic panelists. It is my honor to introduce Maxim Timchenko, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DTEK. DTEK has become the face of strength and resilience of Ukraine's energy systems with just tremendous sacrifice. Maxim, keeping the lights on in Ukraine, that shouldn't just be our end goal. We should really focus on rebuilding and transforming it into a thriving clean energy economy that can contribute significantly to Europe's decarbonization efforts, European energy security. What does this path look like? And how do we make sure that we don't go back to the status quo like we discussed with the previous panelists today?
Thank you, Olga. First of all, I'd like to thank all participants, and especially Ambassador Pyatt for all your support over the last 15 months. Now I feel like being, although virtually, among friends, because we met many times during these 15 months of the war. And every single day, we feel your support and in all the practical steps. Definitely, this energy war is not finished. We have to be prepared for the next winter season. We do everything possible for that. But if you remember our first meetings, indeed, we were talking about future. And our post-war future of energy industry, in my opinion, started on 16th of March, when we all together, with support of our European partners, United States, and all our participants, managed to connect Ukrainian grid to European grid. What was planned to be done in 2024, we've done it in 3 weeks. And I think this is the moment when we started our journey into the future of Ukrainian energy sector. Green, modernized, with the best technologies to become, as it often said now, become green powerhouse for Europe. For the tech, for the company, which is a major private power and gas producer, it was one of the most difficult year for the whole history of 18 years history of us, the Ukrainian market. But in 2014, when it was first invasion of Russians, we lost about 30% of our production assets, Donbass and Crimea. And our response was to invest more than 1.2 billion euro in building renewable capacities, wind and solar farms. During the last 15 months, we lost 50% of what was built since 2014. All our wind parks now on occupied territory. And I'm confident that we will get it back, but that's reality. And our today's response was to continue construction of one of the largest wind farm in Europe, Telegulskaya wind farm, 500 megawatt. And during wartime, we managed to build the first stage, 114 megawatt of capacity, investing more than 200 million euro into this project. And we're proud of this. And what I'm saying, it's symbol of our resistance and symbol of our confidence in the future of our country. I think it's the best example and leadership by example for all other investors or companies thinking either it's time to invest in Ukraine or it's better to wait. I think it's extremely important not to miss the moment. I don't need to repeat what potential we have in developing renewables, in developing infrastructure, in exporting clean energy to Europe, and in playing extremely important role in future energy security landscape of European Union. So we've done it. We've done it without foreign contractors, with missiles flying above our heads, with 20-30% of our working time people are spending in bomb shelters, but we managed to build 114 megawatt of wind farm in Ukraine during the last 7 months. Now we want to continue. I think it's extremely important that focus of recovery conference in London will be on private sector and the role of private sector in the recovery of Ukraine. And today it's time for policymakers, for financial institutions, for governments, and for investors to think seriously about private sector in Ukraine and how important it is to support private sector and to make private sector as a leading force, a driving force of recovery. So we are coming with two very concrete projects, and I think that as more tangible projects, concrete projects can be brought to this discussion, then more results we will get. The first, as I already said, to complete construction of 500 megawatt project. What we need for that? Nothing more than 415 million euro. We know where we get equipment. We know how we bring equipment from the border of Ukraine, because none of foreign contractors can bring it to Ukraine at this moment. We know how to build it, and we know how in record time of 18 months we can add about 400 megawatt capacity, renewable capacity to Ukraine. But we need to have access to capital. In reality, today, for private companies, only international financial institutions supported by the government can be source of the capital, of finance. And this project we want to present next week, and we hope to get response from organizations like EBRD, EIB, and also DFC. I hope that we can develop such projects with GE so that support can be provided from US government and US institutions. The second, what we need is market reforms, market liberalization. And we are really grateful to our government and to our partners that in such extreme conditions in the Ukrainian market, we managed to save liberalized market model developed since 2019. We have to continue. As I already said, we're part of Europe, of European energy market technically, being synchronized and getting more capacity, cross-border capacity to flow power. Now we have to continue market integration, market coupling, bringing European rules of the game to Ukraine. And I think extremely important factors for investors and for the trust we build in with our government. And the third factor is partnership, as it was already mentioned. I think none of foreign investors can be brave enough to come to Ukraine without having local expertise or local partners. the same as Ukrainian companies. They need to learn from their partners outside of Ukraine and learn from new technologies they can bring and share. So we're ready to continue our investments. We, as I said, take an important decision and took all the risk, starting from military risk and going through production risk and a lot of associated with this project of building wind farm. And we invite companies to come and join us. One more project, which is also very important, is Kyiv regional grid. Unfortunately, the whole world see news in April last year. What was the level of destruction in Irpin, Borodyanka, Bucha, these small cities from Kyiv region. And today we developed a 10-year plan how to bring the whole power grid of this region, which supply electricity to 1.2 million and have more than 40,000 kilometers transmission lines, how to bring it to European standards. And it will take 10 years and it will cost 2.4 billion euro. And this concept we also want to bring next week to present to the public and to investors and to governments to show that this is the way how we continue developing our sector and basically bring new standards and new system to Ukrainian energy.
Thank you so much, Maxim. Really appreciate your remarks. We're already getting some questions from the audience, and I will ask you to keep your responses very quick because we only have less than 9 minutes left in the session. Andriy, I'm going to go to you on this question, and then we can see who else can chime in. With the London conference, this is a question from the audience, with the London conference coming up, what do you expect to happen there, and how should we define success? What has to happen at this conference in order for us to say this was a successful reconstruction, not just conversation, but something that kicked off tangible actions?
Following up on the idea which I was discussing during my short speech, the success and the criteria for success for me personally would be the number of projects, very specific projects, which can be implemented while the war is ongoing, which will be signed to be implemented in Ukraine in the nearest future, which can be also compared to the number of funds allocated for these projects and number of megawatts of energy which will be produced out of these projects while the war is ongoing. I would like to resonate with another point which was mentioned by speakers today. And that point is that no matter how tragic and how painful this war is, it has opened many opportunities for LeapFrogs, as Paula suggested, and I fully agree with that. And those opportunities for leapfrogging can be implemented right now, not only in Ukraine, but also in combination between Ukraine and countries which are neighboring us. For example, one of the ideas which we are currently discussing in one of our private initiatives is to combine production of various components for the new green energy generating capacities, no matter what they are, both in Ukraine and, for example, in Poland, using the techno and tax havens that Polish government is currently offering. Not only it can be beneficial from point of view of consumers who will be able to enjoy additional supply, but also can be beneficial from point of view of Ukrainians, because some of our citizens stay in Ukraine and work here. Some of our citizens have moved outside, but they would like to stay connected to Ukraine and work there. By moving partly production of those components from Ukraine to outside countries, we can help both categories and also satisfy high demand in the market. I do hope that this conference in London will bring more money for exactly projects of this type. I fully appreciate the ideology of contemplating project when the war is over, but we don't know when that will happen, unfortunately. I do hope very much it's going to happen sooner than we expect, but we also have to be ready with the plan for extended military process and to maintain energy economy and hence invest into energy projects while it is the case? Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much. Jake, 30-second response. What does DFC expect to announce or discuss or accomplish at the conference?
Well, I'll try not to get ahead of my CEO in terms of stepping on any announcements coming, but I expect that there will be some. And I think I really just want to underscore what Andriy said, because as he was speaking, I think that our vision of success is, I'm holding here our pipeline of projects, and it is significant, but we want it to be significantly larger. Mm-hmm. We want it to be more diverse in terms of the sectors of the economy that we're identifying projects in. We want to be able to move more quickly. And so in terms of the conference next week, using that as a platform for capturing the entrepreneurship and the hustle of the Ukrainian economy. I mean, look, there are projects now that are being built in the western part of Ukraine, in the central and northern areas, where there is a strong economy, business is happening. We want to grow that, and we want to make sure that the private sector has an outlet in London. That's why we're going to be there, in part, to facilitate deal making, generate leads, and move concepts into our pipeline for development.
Amazing. Roger, for the private sector, there's going to be a huge focus on the role of the private sector at this upcoming conference in London. What does success look like? What do companies hope to walk away with after they attend the conference?
I would hope in London we would know who's in, who are the companies that are going to support these efforts, and let's get together and execute. We think like a company, and so I heard Andriy talk about numbers. These are, to us, key performance indicators, KPIs. So companies want to set their goals, their targets, and their metrics. I would love to walk away next week knowing, what does that universe look like? Where is GE going to contribute? Where is DTEK going to contribute? Where is Siemens going to contribute? How are we all taking parts of this? When do we need to deliver things by? Who's going to work with who? And what are the KPIs that we're working towards? And then we can go ahead and do what we do well, we execute.
That's
so
right.
I'd like to see us move forward on the planning at this point.
Excellent. Paula, a quick 30-second response, and then we will go to Mr. Timchenko for your quick wrap-up as well. I know you've mentioned the London conference already in your remarks, but I'm sure you have additional thoughts on the metrics of how to measure success. Go ahead.
Well, Olga, thank you. And we'll be represented at the highest level by the President von der Leyen herself, and I'm sure, as in previous occasions, President von der Leyen will know how to best support Ukraine and use this opportunity and use it also as reaching out to all international partners and gather support behind. I think what is important is to really convey the message of that we're all behind Ukraine, public, private sector. Across the world, this will be extremely important, and then indeed to have very concrete signs of investments, and I can refer to examples as recently as last week. We signed an agreement with Ukraine, which will allow project promoters in Ukraine to apply for the EU funding on projects of common interest. These are in the areas of energy, of transport, of digital. So clearly, we believe on the opportunity of starting investing in the future of Ukraine already now. And I'm sure this will be also the clear, not just message, but also with a clear roadmap that will be coming out of the conference.
Thank you so much. Maxim, 20 seconds of your thoughts on the London conference.
I can make it even in 5 seconds. Result for us is the fact that international financial institutions will turn to private sector. This government-to-government approach or support only state-owned companies probably should be a bit different. Now, please start thinking that private sector can build Ukraine.
Thank you so much. This was an incredible conversation. And just to summarize, we talked about the need to act now, not to wait, to act faster, not make excuses for why we're not moving faster, and bolder and being brave about investing in Ukraine today, but also the importance of partnerships and the right kinds of mechanisms, risk management or risk transfer, and just overall transatlantic, across European public-private partnerships that will make these reconstruction, this transformation efforts successful. Thank you so much, Ambassador Pyatt. Thank you so much to our excellent panel here in person and virtually. And it is my pleasure to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Jennifer Gordon, who will introduce the next panel, just as fascinating of a discussion on nuclear energy. Thank you all so much.